Hello, Dr. Nave. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Good. I thought I'd just sit in here and listen for a few minutes as you kick it off.
Great.
How's the weather?
Oh, it's beautiful here
Is
in
it?
the mountains.
Good.
Yeah, well,
How do you get that nice virtual background? I don't know about this virtual background.
I made it on a Google Slide and I've kept it in my resources. So,
Oh, good.
yeah, so everybody could see it as a template.
Great. How many people do we have sign up?
191.
Oh, Lord have mercy. That's good. I
Yeah.
guess we'll get our money's worth.
Yeah, yeah. I hope they show up. Oftentimes people will, sign up and then turns out they may not be able
Yeah,
to.
we get 150 to sign up to 80 to show up. Yeah, you're probably right. They want to make sure they have a slot.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
The weather good in your area today?
It is. It's beautiful. We
Okay.
are having a good week actually.
Did you teach today?
No, I am fully online.
Oh,
So
did you teach online today?
no, I've been fielding student questions,
Oh, okay. Well, good.
but I have not been actually synchronously teaching. That's tomorrow.
Okay. All right. So am I going to want to save these PowerPoint slides that you do?
I'm going to make sure everybody has a copy, but yes, you can have
Okay.
them. So I'm going to put them in the chat, and then I will also have a QR code. I'm just about ready to pull it up and share.
That's okay. I'm going to let you get ready. I just wanted to say hi. That's all.
That's so nice. Thank you.
We really appreciate you doing it for us. I know you've been working with Tony and Patty, but I just have to, click in every once in a while.
Yeah. Thank you.
Think of something for the next semester. I really want to do something else.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've done lots of specific workshops for folks in any number of things, and then full on institutes. We can do.
Okay. Well, we appreciate it. Have a great day. I'm gonna save the bandwidth.
Okay. All right.
I forgot to wear my suit.
That's okay. It's okay.
Have a great day. Thank you very much. Right,
thank you.
Stop the video.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome those of you who are here. I'm just getting everything ready and we will start at 2:30. And yeah, feel free to add into the chat. And answer to these questions. Okay. Welcome, welcome everybody. Oh, I wanted to do one more thing, and that is make sure that our closed captioning is on. Okay, great. Hey, welcome. Thank you for adding in the chat. I love seeing where everyone is from. So we've got Fayetteville, Asheboro, another Fayetteville, 6 years. And 30 years. That's a lot of good experience. I appreciate that. Welcome, participants. I have turned the Google Slides closed captioning on the presentation. I will be in presentation mode throughout this workshop. And when you are in presentation mode, you can toggle down to the bottom of the screen and press on closed captions. And you can change the size. So you can make it larger or smaller. So if you happen to have any problems hearing, you will still be able to follow along with what's happening. About 85% of Facebook videos are watched without sound. Is a statistic I ran across several years ago. And I find that I often will watch things without sound by preference. Thank you for adding to the chat. I see several of you throughout. North Carolina, I was just in Spruce Pine hiking on this weekend. So thank you, Richard, for adding that you're in Spruce Pine. And it was beautiful. Yes. So I am over in Lenoir, North Carolina, not Lenoir County, but Lenoir City in Caldwell County, just south of Boone. We have the CCC and TI, which has two campuses, one in Caldwell and one in Watauga. So but I work at Appalachian State as the UDL coordinator there. Go back here. And I'll start our timer when we get 5 minutes in it, just a few minutes so people know as they are joining. Thanks, Carla and Raleigh, 5 years. I am just so honored that so many of you are joining me today. This is a lot. And you're all doing so well. I know it's a long semester. I already feel it. I'm going to make sure my settings are right here. Oops. And share my screen again. Okay, just going to make sure I've got optimum for video clip and for computer sound. You know, if you want to move my picture around, if you're just looking at me, you can make it larger or smaller. If you can't read some of the things on my background, you can pull the bottom left corner down and make a larger screen for my face. Or if you'd like to, when you move your mouse around the screen, you'll see at the top, you are viewing Lily and Nave's screen, and to the right, you'll see view options. And if you click on that, you can also choose side-by-side mode. And that means there's nothing obscuring the screen, like there's not my picture as a box that's obscuring the screen. But I have also created the slide so that if you still have a box on your screen, it should not interfere with anything on the screen for us. So. Hey, go Mountaineers. Thanks, Carla and Raleigh. Go Mountaineers. A grad of App State. Mindy's in Graham and worked with our community college students for 13 years. Amy in Rocky Mount, 20 years. Wow, there is a lot of experience today in this Zoom room. And I am so happy to have you. So we've gone from west to east and Rocky Mount, 20 years. Thank you, Amy, for joining. In Elizabeth City, nice, 20 years. This is a lot of fantastic experience of working with our students. I will need your expertise. I'll be asking you a little bit about what you've seen. And I appreciate that expertise. Ahoskie Roanoke Chowan Community College, 2 years. Thank you, Jessica. Grantsboro, Darlene. Thank you so much. Grantsboro, okay. And okay, we're doing great. All right, and oh wow, now we've got some more folks. Rocky Mount Mainland Community College, a new EMS program director, Southern Pines, Pamlico, Rocky Mount, Elizabeth City, Canyonsville, teaching full-time for 5 years from James Front Community College, Spruce Pine. Great. Okay, I'm going to start our countdown here. We are going to start our session in 5 minutes. Oh, in Salisbury. Thanks, Teresa. 15 years. Welcome. I have the Google Slides screen share right now, or I'm screen sharing my Google Slides. And with Google Slides, you can have an automatic captioning. And so I'm using the closed captioning, and they are pretty accurate, which is really helpful, especially if you have any students who are in a noisy place or forgot their headphones or need some more, or English language learners. This is a really helpful thing. So Elizabeth City, Felix is in Elizabeth City. Wow, Amy, 32 years. In Blue Ridge Community College, Carteret, Morehead City, 25 years. This is great. What a fantastic group. Randolph Community College in Asheboro, teaching for 8 years. Welcome. We have 67 participants so far. And Cornelius, great. Surrey Community College in Dobson, Stanley Community College, Elizabeth City, and Hendersonville. Marion. Hey, I was in Marion this weekend too. There's some pretty country to go hiking. Welcome, Clyde from Asheboro, and Robeson Community College in Lumberton and Albemarle. Great. Elizabeth City, I'm making sure I'm catching everybody. South Piedmont Community College and Nash Community College in Rocky Mount. Wake Tech, Carteret in Morehead City, Durham Tech, Surrey Community College, and Stanley Community College in Albemarle. Great, keep them coming. We have quite a wide variety. We will be starting in about 2 minutes. So as people are joining us, I'd love for you to add in your where you are joining us from. And I love seeing these scroll through. You can see the chat if you click on the chat, and add in your where you're joining us from and how many years you've been working with community college students in some capacity. I taught at Caldwell Community College about 16 years ago. and taught there for a few years before I ended up moving my teaching career. I still live in Lenore and in Caldwell County, but I took a job up at Appalachian. So I've had some experience with our community college here, and I'm so thankful for it. All right. Wake Tech, Nash, Malin Community College, Western Piedmont, Asheboro. Wow, what a great opportunity to get everyone together here. So many really wonderful schools. We're doing such a great job. And we will get started in just about a minute. And I didn't know if any of my hosts, if Tony or Patty or anybody, if you needed to say anything at the very beginning, you're welcome to, but if not, you don't have to, whatever you need.
Yeah. I think we're good, Lillian. Just appreciate everybody tuning in and joining. Glad to have you aboard, and please enjoy this training opportunity. There's 3 more. Encourage you, everyone, to take advantage of every one of these. And we plan to do more of these types of things through Perkins as the opportunity arises. We'd like to thank Lillian for being here, and thank you for sharing your expertise. And thanks for the folks at Caldwell for introducing us to her. So just sit back, enjoy the information. And Patty, do you have anything you want to say? I know she's on.
I am. I'm fine. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, thanks, Patty.
Great. Okay. So I'm watching as all of these answers cycle in from our participants. Right now we're up to 93. Wow, this is fantastic. So one thing you might want to do is to make sure your microphone is off in case there's some other extraneous noises. I have tried to mute all other things from my home studio where I am, including my teenage boys who are going to be leaving at some point during this, but they know that they're not supposed to interrupt. As you're joining us, please add where you're joining us from and how long you have worked with either teaching or supporting students in the community college system. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today. Today is the first of 4 workshops on universal design for learning. And they will be at this time for the next 4 Tuesdays in a row. Today is an overview of why we need universal design for learning. And I'll go over the need for it, what it is, and a small introduction. And then each of the 3 successive workshops are going to be specific, helpful interventions in how to use universal design for learning, or UDL. So before we begin, a few things just for your help and your ease of viewing. You can always enlarge the square where I'm speaking. If you toggle over it, you'll see you can just see the one speaker if you would like. You could also see everybody else's camera if you want, but if you just want to see the one speaker, you can click on the one single square, and you can make that larger or smaller. So I've put up my information so that you can see it at any time. You can always email me. And if you are on Twitter, that seems to be a really great place to get a lot of ideas. And we've got quite a large universal design for learning community on academic Twitter, as it's called, or just Twitter for academics, not a separate Twitter, just a lot of academics on Twitter. But that's my Twitter handle for Lillian Nave, and also the podcast, Think UDL. And I put on great hints, hopefully, and links to our episodes, so those might be helpful. We are going to use what's called the participants tab. So if you look towards the bottom of your screen, you'll see participants. We'll use that for a yes/no question. And that might be helpful for you to know where that is. If you would like to, you can use that right now if you want to try a yes or a no and just see if it's working. We will be using that participants tab. And you might notice that there are some words moving across the top of the screen. And that is because I am using Google Slides in presentation mode, and I have enabled the closed captioning, and it's pretty good, I would say. It's pretty helpful. So if you need to turn off the audio or your audio cuts out, you still should be able to follow along. Now, the last thing I want to show you is near the bottom center of the screen, you'll see a QR code. And that QR code is a link to the slides that I will be using. And I'm also going to put it right in the chat here. So if you would like to click on that, or you want to and follow it along on whatever device you're using now, you can certainly split the screen and do that. So if you wanted to linger or stay on a slide longer, you can do that, or look ahead or click on any of the links that I provide. You're welcome to do that. Or if you would like to use your cell phone and just aim your camera at the QR code at the bottom of the screen, you can get to the slides as that way as well. So you can have it on your phone at the same time. So let's get started. So the overview, today's session, I'm hoping to be 55 minutes, and right now we are at 2:35, so this will go until 3:30. We're going to learn why UDL is so important in higher education. We're going to learn what the 3 principles of universal design for learning, or UDL, are. And we're going to learn how to implement some UDL changes. The following 3 workshops will be more interventional, like lots of easy ways to implement UDL, or different ways that maybe you hadn't thought of. But today we're going to get a short overview of how you might do that. So I'm going to start specifically with goals. And one of the principles of universal design for learning includes splitting up what the goals are between knowledge and skills. So by the end of today's session, you as a participant should be able to explain the need for UDL in higher education based on our learners' variability. And you should be able to describe the 3 principles of the UDL guidelines. And these guidelines are designed by CAST, and I will be explaining that. And also a skill, hopefully you will have obtained by the end of today's workshop, is to be able to choose and design interventions in your teaching practice using universal design for learning strategies. So sometimes if we combine a knowledge and a skill goal, we inadvertently put a barrier in front of our students because we haven't separated or clarified our goals. So one of the first things that UDL has helped me to understand is to be very clear in what we want to accomplish. So now we have our goals. Let's proceed. My first question is, would you eat this Southwest style Mexican lasagna? Now, using your participants tab, which is should be near the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a yes or a no answer. And click on yes or no. And if you would like to, could you think of, using the chat, why someone might decide they don't want to eat this Mexican style Southwest lasagna? Any ideas of why somebody might not want to eat it? So using that, there we go. Using your participants tab, I see 41 yeses and 15 nos. Dieting, no veggies, doesn't like black beans. Somebody might be a vegetarian. Don't mix Mexican and Italian. No corn in the lasagna. Spicy cheese, maybe it's too spicy. No, I'm on a no carb diet. I might be allergic. I might not like pasta. This doesn't look like what I think of as lasagna. Great. Oh, this is fantastic. So yeah, there are lots of reasons why somebody may not want to eat this lasagna, right? And we may not know that. If I had invited you over to my house for dinner and served this, it's quite possible that my dinner guests were not going to eat it. They might be allergic. They might be lactose intolerant. They might not like veggies that are seen here. Don't like the beans, too gassy. Excellent. Thank you so much for participating in this, what is seemingly a silly question, but it gets at something. that applies to our students, and that is variability. Now, I've only chosen like 3 different ways that somebody who's invited to a dinner party might be variable: gluten-free, vegetarian, lactose intolerant. Those could be some of the reasons why they might not be interested in eating this Southwestern style lasagna. And universal design for learning is an analogy to think about how we think about our students. And if we invite them into our class and only serve them one dish in a particular way, we may not recognize that there are some students who can't eat it or won't eat the dish the way we've prepared it. And so instead, how would we solve this problem if I wanted to have all of my participants, 116 of you, over to my house for dinner? What I might do instead is to have a taco bar, a way for anybody who comes to this meal to design it themselves or to have choices and options. Therefore, you could choose what you're going to use, what you're going to have, and nobody is left hungry if we have lots of options. Now, we see that in our world today. We see that in menus. We see that in options for how we are even offering school, if it's online or in person, or various other ways. We choose our cable provider, right? We have lots of ways of choosing how we interact in the world. But with education, we haven't quite gotten to the same level of variability, or at least not understood the variability of our students. And so universal design for learning asks us to think about how the people who are coming to our meal or are coming to our classes might be different from each other, and maybe even different from us. So I brought a short video that can help you understand universal design for learning. This is made out of Ahead, Ireland, and explains how this variability works in higher education.
Imagine you went into a big clothes store and all that was on sale was one type of outfit, in one size, with no thought given to different individual body shapes or personalities. That would be crazy, right? Expecting everyone to be able to fit into the same size and express themselves in the same colour and style? Yet in many cases, that's exactly what is happening in our education system. When it comes to learning, variability is the rule, not the exception, and our college campuses are now grappling with the demands of an increasingly diverse cohort of learners, with increasing numbers of international students, students from different cultural and socio-economic backgrounds, mature students, and students with disabilities. Despite this, curriculums are still designed for the mythical average learner, and all are expected to engage and learn on the same terms. Not enough flexibility is built in at the design stage to give all students equal opportunities to learn in ways that play to their own strengths. So, how can our institutions respond to these challenges? Enter Universal Design for Learning, or UDL for short. UDL is an educational framework that guides the design of learning goals, materials, methods and assessments, as well as the policies surrounding these curricular elements, with the diversity of learners in mind. The framework was developed by US organisation CAST and is based on research in the field of neuroscience. It promotes 3 core principles for educators to build into their teaching practice, calling on them to provide students with multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. The framework includes a set of guidelines on how you can turn these principles into practice. For example, by fostering collaboration with the introduction of group work with clear goals, roles, and responsibilities. By using different types of media to support learning and ensuring that all materials are accessible. And by providing a choice of assessment instruments while maintaining robust learning outcomes. You are probably already including some UDL elements in your practice without realising it, and there's much more to explore. So don't be afraid to let Universal Design for Learning give you a new lens through which to look at your teaching and learning practice and help you to better reach all of your students. For more information and resources, visit ahead.
So that is done by one of my friends in Ireland, Dara Ryder, and helps us to understand that what we are dealing with is learner variability. Just like we're preparing a feast, and we need to think about the differences in the people who are coming to enjoy it. So why universal design for learning? Because classrooms are filled with students who are different. They have different backgrounds, different attention spans and interests, different language ability, and different cultural backgrounds. And we need to have a place and a space that invites all of those learners, that provides instruction for all of those learners and values those learners. And universal design for learning helps us to do that. Now, we have a myth of average that has really helped to shape our educational system. And during the Industrial Revolution, the statistical averages were the benchmarks for measuring. And so we began to base things, including education, on what an average student or person would be. And that was created in a larger scale in order to think about averages and guideposts for an average student. However, in the middle of this graph, you'll see average doesn't exist. People are variable. People are different. And in fact, all those differences are really fantastic. They bring a variability to a project. They bring different strengths, and students can learn from each other. So everybody has a jagged learning profile, meaning they might read well, or they might need help in writing. They might have various different strengths and weaknesses that makes them who they are. So we need to think about our learning environments on the bottom left-hand corner of this screen, and need to figure out how to design learning environments that accentuates and values that variability rather than destroys that variability or wants people to conform to a mythical idea of average. So this is what's going to help us to do that. So I've got another thing for you to help me participate, and I'd like to learn a little bit from you as well. So at the top of your screen, at the top of the screen, you're viewing Lillian Maeve's screen. And just below that, or next to it, you'll see view options. And go ahead and add in, around, and next to, using whichever stamp or annotation you would like to. Because I like that. Oh, somebody circled the entire screen. Exactly. I see a lot of checks for our first generation students, a lot of cognitive disabilities, family expectation, English language learners, depression, different political views, autism spectrum disorder, visual impairments, executive function deficiency. This is great. First generation seems to be getting a lot. Deaf, hard of hearing, high anxiety. We have honor students, ADD and ADHD. Thank you. The digital divide. Thank you for adding that. Wow. Perfectionism. Well, it looks like we've covered a lot of these. A lot of information. It looks like a lot of people have annotated the English language learners and first generation college students, and a lot around cognitive disabilities as well. So you serve a wide variety of students. You already serve these students. How can we as a university, how can we as instructors, how can we serve this wide variety of students and that exist in our community colleges and that, we serve? Great. Okay, I'm going to change our annotation. See if I can get that off. Clear our annotations. Clear all drawings. Okay, so our basic principles of universal design for learning. And thank you for the dual enrolled as well. I actually have students who are dual enrolled. So with our basic principles of universal design for learning, we have 3 areas: the why of learning, the what of learning, and the how of learning. Each one of these will be a separate workshop that we will cover in the next 3 Tuesdays. So we'll go first with the why, I think then the how, and then finally the what of learning. So these 3 areas or principles create a 3-legged stool. If you take away one of them, you don't have universal design for learning anymore. The platform is no longer stable. So what many people confuse universal design for learning with is accessibility. Now, certainly accessibility is an important part of universal design for learning, but it is not everything as far as UDL goes. But that accessibility part goes in the middle column, which is the what of learning. And that has to do with the recognition networks of the brain. So how do we represent the materials for our students to learn? How does that information get into our students' heads? And before we even get to giving our students information, we have to also have motivated students who understand why they are coming into the classroom, why they are taking part in this online course, why they are starting this area of study. And that's the engagement part. Why should I learn this? And so that part of UDL is how we motivate our students to learn. That middle part is the what of learning. What is it that they're going to learn? How can we present it? And finally, this blue area on the far right, which includes the strategic networks of the brain, is how are they, our students, going to show us or demonstrate their understanding of the principles they've learned, of the material that they have taken in your class. So those are the 3 main principles: engagement, representation, and then finally action and expression. So going to take off my annotation here. These are the full set of guidelines. Now I have a link in the slides to these guidelines. So if you downloaded them, have them on your computer, or if you took the mobile slides, you should be able to. Now you can't use the annotation tool to get to it because I'm on presentation mode, but you can get to that link with the set of Google Slides I provided for you that I put in the chat. So this is the large table of the universal design for learning principles. And we're going to go through what each of those means briefly. That engagement is how we get students in. The what is what we produce or give students to learn. And then the how is the assessment. How do we understand what they have received or what they have learned in our class? So the reason why universal design for learning is so important and helpful for that wide variety of students that you all have shown me that you have met in your many years of service in the North Carolina Community College system is because it creates an equitable learning environment. So you probably have seen this image before. And in the first image, it's assumed that everyone is going to benefit from the same supports, therefore they're treated equally. However, in the second image, individuals are given different supports. Maybe you've heard of it as accommodations, or maybe you've seen that resources have been allocated differently to different groups of people. And that certainly helps. But what it doesn't do is take down the barriers that were present from the beginning. So in the third image, you can see that the students here, or the kids who want to see the baseball game, they were prevented from doing so because of the wooden fence that prevented them from looking. If we change that into a barrier that allows for people to look through it, but does not, and keeps the students safe, right? Keeps them safe from getting hit by a baseball, but still allows them to be fans, then we have actually taken away that systemic barrier that had been that had been created. So universal design for learning helps us, let's see, to understand it's the environment that needs to change, not the students. So it is a big mind shift. It is a way of thinking about teaching, a way of thinking about teaching and learning that is about design principles, not about fixing a student or providing an accommodation. There's a difference in what UDL is. So originally, universal design for learning emerged actually out of the 1980s from the universal design in architecture movement. And the reasons why we have ramps, why we have automatic door openers, why we might have easily pushed open doors in your offices or in your buildings is so that all people can benefit. And we found in just our living in the United States, right, in America, that curb cuts, meaning that little indentation to allow for somebody who had a stroller or who was on a wheelchair, allowed for someone to cross the street much more readily than if they had to hop up on a curb. But that also helped so many other people along the way. So if you had a bunch of bags, if you had a stroller that you needed to push, those small incremental changes helped that may have been made for someone who was disabled or had some sort of disability, ended up helping a much larger community. So universal design for learning kind of emerges out of that, starts with accessibility, but moves into many other things. So the first option starting in 2004 was considering the barriers and trying to take away those barriers and then provide options or choice. Think back to our story of the dinner party and having Southwestern lasagna that not everyone will eat. So giving students choice in the tools and the methods is an important first step for UDL. However, in the last decade, there's been an evolving focus in universal design for learning that really puts the emphasis on learner variability. And that's how I started today's workshop, is on that emphasis of learner variability. So if we asked you to all wear the same clothes, you wouldn't want to wear the same clothes. They wouldn't be the same size. If we asked you to run a race and only gave you a size 9 shoe, that'll be too big for some and too little for small for others. So this is that would have been basing your lesson plan or your education on the average. So we also need to separate the goals into knowledge goals related to understanding concepts and skills goals. So if you wanted a student to explain their knowledge using a PowerPoint, but they had no idea how to use a PowerPoint, are you grading them on the use of the PowerPoint or on their understanding? And so thinking about what differences each goal should have. And then thinking about learning and ability. When we think about learning, we have to think about context and environment as well. So thinking about the situational factors of your learning environment, of your place where you are, what if we're in a pandemic or not. And finally, universal design for learning is for creating expert learners. We make the assumption that the purpose of education is to help our learners become better learners, that they can learn for themselves after they've taken our class. So we're going to go through those 3 areas: engagement, that motivation, or the why of learning. So I want to tell you a story. And this story has to do with a local community college. And it has to do with my local community college and my son who goes to the local community college. And he goes to the local community college in a car that I bought for him to use as his transportation, which is a little 2011 Honda Fit. And he was on his way to school one morning and is a very conscientious student and felt that he was running a bit late. And so he sped up to move around a slow moving car in front of him. And guess what? He was going 70 miles per hour in a 55, in a 50 zone. I think it was 55, and was pulled over. And that made him even more late for school. Now, this happened in the before times, before the pandemic, in February or March of the early March of 2020. And we received notice that you could go to a courthouse and plead that down with very little effort, we were told, so as not to go on one's driving record that one doesn't pay for someone's insurance, meaning I was going to pay for this insurance. So my son and I go to the Caldwell courthouse earlier this month, and we were herded into various different rooms throughout the process and not told anything of how this was going to work. So we found ourselves in a room with 40 other people, and we were spaced out according to the pandemic guidelines, but nobody told us what we were doing or what was going to happen. Eventually, we were told to move from that room into a hallway, also lined up, not told what was going to happen. And then we were moved from the hallway into another courtroom where we saw other people moving around the courtroom in a very orderly fashion. Eventually, our row was called up and we moved towards the front of the courtroom where my son was able to answer some questions and was able to reduce the fine that he received, which spared his mom some insurance. And then we were told to go pay the fine downstairs. There were no signs that told us which room to go to. There was no arrows on the floor how to understand where to go. We opened 7 different doors, not knowing where to go, and finally made it so we could pay our courthouse fee. Now, this is when I thought, wow, we need some UDL in our local government or in how we go through this process, because I was completely disoriented in this new place, in new people. Now imagine your students who are in a new place, who may have never been to college before, right? We have many first generation students for whose parents cannot shepherd them through this, who haven't been told how to study, who may not know how this whole institution works. So how is it that we can provide the help and the guidance for our students so it's not a confusing place to learn? So I wanted to share the happy ending of this story because stories activate parts in our brain so that a listener can turn the story into their own ideas and experience. And they contextualize. You probably have an experience where you found a similarity. Think of yourself in the role of your student. Maybe they're in a new place and they need some direction at least. So I show you the end of this story is a happy ending where my son, I asked for his permission to share this story, but he was able to get a job in the intervening time, and you might see him at your local Food Lion so he could pay for the court costs that we went to. So it ended up being a happy story. We've learned some responsibility there, but in the meantime, also notice the need for help and understanding a new environment. And that's what UDL does. So this is one part of the brain, which is the affective networks, that motivation, the engagement, how safe do we feel? How invested do we feel? And there's a column in the Universal Design for Learning guidelines that help us to understand engagement. The next session will be all about engagement, and I'll give you lots of examples of how to do that. So the 3 areas for engagement are recruiting interest, sustaining effort and persistence, and self-regulation. And I've just chosen one example of each to show you what that means in the educational environment. So for engagement, we want to make sure that our students are moving up this chain. Many of our students are in that ritual compliance, meaning they know they have to get a C, they have to pass this in order to get their degree or something like that. How can we move those students up towards some more high attention and even to the green area of high attention and high commitment? Now, those are the students who say, I read the article you asked us to read and they email you questions before class. Those are sometimes hard to come by, but we have students who run all throughout this spectrum. And we want to add enough water to the sea to raise all of our boats and move those students up the engagement spectrum. How do we motivate our students? Well, it's that combination of student, teacher, and the content. Where all 3 of those overlap is meaningful engagement. Where the student and the content overlap is the relevance to their lives. That's the green section. Where the teacher and the content overlap, that is the teacher's expertise. And where the student and the teacher overlap, the orange part is the relationship. So how can you help students and motivate them? Help them to make connections with that material and the wider world. You heard my story about UDL and the court system and a speeding ticket. Make those connections if you can. Tell your story. What made you interested in the first place in your subject matter? You must have an interest, something that motivates you, and go ahead and tell your students. And there are multiple ways to engage your students using real world authentic tasks, giving them choices and expression, lots of flexibility. And you might already do several of these: service learning, problem-based learning, or giving autonomy to your students, allowing them to choose and move forward in certain parts of your course. These are all ways to help engage your students in your classroom. Again, first workshop will be lots of applicable ways to do this. So once you have engaged those students, how is it that you're going to present the materials to your students? And for that, I have a question. So on your screen, you're going to see a poll question. How do you prefer to receive information? If you were sent a TED Talk, which of the following ways would you experience it? You have 4 choices, and go ahead and choose which way you would watch it or listen to it or read it. In video form, watching it and listening to it only, maybe while doing something else like housework. Watch the video talk with or without sound while reading the closed captions or a running transcript. Or skip that video and audio portion altogether and go right to the transcript and just glance through it or read through it there. So go ahead and please give your answer to this question. Great, I've got about 70% of you have voted, 89. I'll leave it open just for a few more seconds. And then we'll see the results. Okay, I'm going to close it in about 10 seconds. So I've got about 85% have voted. I appreciate your attention to this. How would you watch a TED Talk? And by the way, the TED Talk that's on the screen is The Myth of Average by Todd Rose, who's one of the founders of the UDL guidelines. And I have a link to that in our course slides. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Got about 90% of you. And I'm going to share the results. Okay, so it looks like 2/3, 60% of you would watch it and listen along. But a good 2 out of 10 of you would listen to it only maybe while you're doing something else. 1 out of 10 would watch the video talk and use the closed captioning at the same time. And about 1 out of 10 would skip the video and go right to the transcript. That happens to be what I do. I end up going to the transcript and scrolling through it. So in just a smattering of 119 people, we have a wide variety of ways that you would interact with material if somebody had given it to you and asked you to understand it, or to make it your own, or to use it in some way. We have a variety of ways that we process information, and that might work for us. We might have someone who's going to pick up kids at a school, who has a 40-hour-a-week job, who can only listen to it in the car rather than read the textbook, who's taking care of children at home, young children, or who is an English as a second language learner and might need to see the words throughout the screen, like as a transcript or a rolling closed caption. So because of that variability, we need to provide options for our students. So we need variability in the recognition network. So that is the what of learning, how we recognize information. So Universal Design for Learning guidelines say that we need to provide options for perception, how we see things and understand them, for language and symbols, and that helps us with multiple media, meaning we can provide lots of ways for students to get this information. And finally, provide options for comprehension. Can we say it in a number of different ways? You'll notice that so far today, I've used an analogy of a dinner party and then of a court system for how Universal Design for Learning can affect a situation. One was good and one was not so good. So I'm trying to give you options for comprehensions that way. So chances are you're probably already doing this. Good job. With the hundreds of years of teaching experience that you already have, you are already creating lots of ways for your students to get information, whether it's in a textbook, it's a web page, if it's a graphic organizer, a podcast, you're probably already offering information in multiple forms. And that's a great first step. But can we do more? For example, illustrate your media in multiple ways. I made this infographic for my students for their fully online course, knowing some of my students probably never had a fully online course besides emergency remote in high school. So showing them the cadence of the weekly work in a different form. So mapping out the week and what that schedule looks like for our course. So that's one example of representing not just the homework, like the reading or video that they have to watch, but how the course is presented. And highlighting patterns and big ideas. When we give information out to our students, we have to remember that they are new to that material. They do not have the connections in their brains like a spider web, the way that we have connections because we have become experts in that field. So that knowledge are like little data points for our students. If those students have some experience, they can connect those data points together. And as they get better and better at that subject, at that job, at that skill, they can become creative with that knowledge and experience. So you'll notice that all of the dots are the same for each of those rectangles, but the connections change as the student changes. So like this Chuck Close self-portrait using lots of small circles and abstract colors, the larger picture takes shape over time. We can help bring our students into focus so that the material becomes focused for them using Universal Design for Learning principles. Okay, we've gone through 2 of those legs of the stool of universal design for learning, only 1 more left. So we've engaged our students. We've provided lots of ways for students to get that information, whether it's visual or audio or a website or a magazine article or a video you've made. Great. Now, how are we going to assess or understand that the students actually got it, that they've learned something? And that's why we need multiple means of expression or action and expression. So I've got another question for you. And this poll is your preference on what you would like to do in a face-to-face setting. If you had the chance and people weren't masked, what would it look like? Would it be a lecture hall with straight rows of stationary seats bolted to the floor? Would it be a room with several half-circle rows of seats? Would it be a room of chairs with affixed half desks that are movable with some degree of dragging? Or would it be a room with movable wheeled tables and separated wheeled chairs, kind of like the pictures that you see? You can also move the poll window if you want to see those pictures. Great. We've got about half of you have voted. I'm going to give you a chance to vote. I'm just catching up on the chat here too. Great. Okay, about 10 more seconds and you can vote on your poll. When you're in a face-to-face setting, what kind of room setup do you prefer while you're teaching or facilitating? Thank you. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and let's check out our results. Okay, wow, 60% of you would prefer a room with movable wheeled tables and separated wheeled chairs. 2/3 of you would like that flexibility in how you teach. And the room with chairs and half desks that are movable is another 20%. And another 20% of a room with several half circle rows of seats, and only 4 said a lecture hall with straight rows of stationary seats. So think of the variability and the flexibility of how you would want to demonstrate your knowledge and how you would want to run your classroom. And think that our students would probably benefit from that chance as well, from that flexibility. So what does that look like? Well, that is variability in the strategic networks. So that means providing options for physical action or how people can respond to your questions. Is it a paper? Is it an exam? Is it a video they produce of documentary film? Is it a podcast? Is it a PowerPoint? How is it that students are going to be able to present to you that they've understood your course? Using multiple media for communication. So is that if you need them to do a presentation, can they do it via PowerPoint or Prezi or a tiki-taki timeline? I'll go into all these options when we talk about action and expression. And then also providing options for executive functions to enhance that monitoring. So helping students create deadlines, helping them to break down larger projects into smaller projects. Many of you probably already do this, but this helps in the executive functions of our students and they perform better. And it creates strategic and goal-directed learners. So learners differ in the ways that they can navigate an environment and express what they know. How can we think about assessments? I've shown you a couple examples of coaches in teams with their teams of girls playing volleyball, softball. And sometimes we need to think about our role as a judge where we put on our big black robe and maybe a powdered wig, and we evaluate our students and say yes or no, good or bad. And is that the role of our assessments? Or can our assessments also look like the role of a coach? We put on our whistle, maybe a visor, and we say, that was good, let's move forward in this, or here's how you can tweak this, or you can move forward in this way. So thinking about our assessments as ways to help coach our students along the way, not just as a way to evaluate. So thinking of formative and summative assessments. Formative assessments help our students to increase their ability and give them some feedback. Summative assessments are those like a final exam that evaluates their performance. So thinking about both of those and how they interrelate in your classes. So what are some creative ways that you could have your students explain what they know? They can make infographics, they can write a paragraph, they can create a comic strip, they can express what they read using an improv game, which is something I've done in my classes. And you can be a superhero to your students by doing that. And so thinking of creative ways that allow for student choice, for students to explain what they know in a variety of different ways will be helpful for your students, and also a lot of fun for you. You do not have to dumb down any of your points or your rubrics, but it does allow for options for your students. So we've done pretty well. It's 3:22, I'm ready to review. What is UDL? It's 3 legs of a stool: engagement, which is motivating and sustaining enthusiasm for learning; representation, which is presenting information in different ways; and action and expression, offering options and support so everyone can create, learn, and share. So I wanted to give you a student perspective with a 1-minute video from a student who was in a class that was infused by Universal Design for Learning.
Having UDL infused in a course really taught me how I learn and absorb information, especially new information. I felt like I was constantly learning something new about the course material, as well as something about myself and how I learn. And this really kept the course engaging and entertaining because I was really absorbing the information. I was constantly rewarded by learning new material from different perspectives and different forms. And it really gave me a deeper understanding of the material, and it also gave me a grasp of the purpose of why I was actually learning it. Lastly, I was able to apply what I learned in this course to multiple classes I took in the future. I learned that if I write my questions down that I had on a subject, and then later on answer them through different types of models, it really helped me understand the new topic. So this class really helped me absorb the actual course material, as well as learn more about myself and how I learn, and it really did help me in the end.
Thanks to Cameron. I appreciate her perspective, and she did all of that off the cuff when she was asked what UDL meant for her class. So you might be asking, but wait a second, how is UDL not accommodation, and how is it different than regular instruction? Well, Universal Design for Learning is proactive. It's not static because it's flexible, and it's not reactive. Accommodation or differentiation, you might call it, is when you look at one student and you say, oh, they can't do it the way others can, and we need to make one change for that student. UDL is proactive and designs for that learner variability. It evaluates the environment and the culture, not the curriculum and not the student. The actions are flexible and intentional. It designs instruction prior to arrival of students, and not only does it focus on variability of students, it values that variety. We plan for the margins, but everybody benefits. And it is a way to anticipate and remove barriers. So I wanted to reflect on just today's workshop and let you know that you have been UDL'd, because in engaging in each one of these columns, I've included the things I've included in this workshop. We started with learning goals. We connected with personal experience. We value and leveraged the people in the room, in the Zoom room. We provided options for reflection and choice of using the mobile slides, going at your own pace. For representation, we used text, icons, videos, closed captions, activated your background knowledge on what you've used before. And I'm providing lots of links for you to look at things further. And finally, for action and expression, we used Zoom polls, a chat entry in the participants tab, yes and no, and you annotated. So lots of different ways, even in this restricted environment, that you were able to participate and show your knowledge. And we use the QR code and the links and enhance this progress monitoring by telling you, hey, we're 2/3 of the way done, we're 1/3 of the way done, we're making it through. So all of that is how I've incorporated universal design for learning just in this workshop. So I also have some resources. And if you want this slide deck, I've just added it again to the chat, but you will be able to see resources connected to College Star, which provides lots of instructional tools. I'll be going into several of them in the next workshops. I also have a book, not my book, but David Rose, who started UDL and CAST, has this freely available book online. You also have me as a resource. So if ever you want to reach out and email me, you can at navely@appstate.edu. You can follow on Facebook, the Think UDL page, and on Twitter for Lillian Nave or Think UDL. You also have a live link over here for the Think UDL podcast website. I'm the host of Think UDL, which we have 47 episodes. They're usually 30 to 45 minutes. Lately, they've been up to 60 minutes, where I'm talking with people just like you who are teaching in the time of Corona and implementing UDL strategies. And finally, I've put together a list of kind of a top 3 or 4 videos and podcasts and text resources and websites. You will see, if you click on here, you'll get a list of those on a Google Doc. And podcasts, if you'd rather learn some more on your own while you're riding in the car, you can listen to some of the UDL podcasts. And text or infographics, let's say you'd much rather look through an infographic or read a 3-pager about what is UDL, I've got some text there. And if you'd rather look through some websites, go to CAST, the UDL guidelines, or my podcast website, which is Think UDL. So I wanted to also point out that I made this background, Zoom background. So if at any time you had a question or you wanted to tweet or something, you always had that available so that you didn't have to wait until the end. And I just did that by creating a background, a slide. You'll see it as the last slide in the materials I just added in the chat. And you can do that as well and add to your Zoom background. And that is just for clarity and also to avoid the distractions. You did not see my 15-year-old run across the back because he forgot his car keys, or my 16-year-old, I should say. So I can stick around. It is 3:30. We made it. You did it. Awesome. I'll stick around for any questions, and I appreciate and honor your time that you spent learning about UDL, and I really appreciate it. I hope to see some of you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Appreciate you doing this for us. And if anybody loses the link to the slide deck, they can always email me or Tony at NCCCS. And hopefully we'll see all of you guys next Tuesday.
Great, thank you. I'll put up my information too if anybody needs that. And Tony and Patty, I think I've got a recording So
Yes. Okay.
it has been recording. And I will send that, I guess, email it to you guys. I've got a group email.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd
that
be
would
good.
be great.
And
And,
then we
and
can-
we can also post the deck. Sorry,
Yeah.
Tony, I didn't mean to speak over you.
I was going to say the same thing. We can post it on NC Perkins too. So
Okay, for the slide. Yeah,
yeah.
no problem. I'm going to stop share. There we go. And I'm